Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Budding Solutions, a series on disease and pest management in cannabis sativa. My name is Kim Leonberger. I'm an Extension Associate in the Department of Plant Pathology at the University of Kentucky. In this episode, we're going to take a closer look at pesticides for hemp production. To discuss this very important topic, I would like to introduce Dr. Ric Bessin. Rick is an extension entomologist at the University of Kentucky, where his work focuses on identification and management of fruit and vegetable crop pests. In addition, he also serves as the Kentucky Integrated Pest Management Coordinator and the Kentucky liaison to the IR4 project, which helps to register pesticides for minor uses and minor acreage crops such as hemp. Rick also manages the University Pesticide Applicator Program, which provides educational resources on pesticide use and safety. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rick. I really appreciate it. So we're going to do a little bit different style this time, and we're going to talk through this more as a conversation. There's a lot of information for growers, and I think this is a big question for them as to, what products are out there, how that labeling works, all of that information. So I have some questions for you, and I know you are a wealth of information, so I'm really excited to hear more information about this as well. So the first question that I have is, how does a grower know which pesticides are approved for use on cannabis sativa?
Okay, that's a great question. And growers have to have that understanding. Let me just back up a little bit, talk about why we're in this situation with hemp. And the issue is that, it became a legal crop to grow with our last approved farm bill. And so it's a new crop. Uh, Pesticides have to be labeled on specific plants and crops, particularly those intended for food and feed uses, because we're concerned about using pesticides appropriately, and particularly on food and feed crops where they have a tolerance and things like that, so we know that they're going to be safe for their uses, whatever those uses are, that they're going to be safe. And so a question is, how does a hemp grower, sort of be privy or understand what pesticides can be used on hemp? What one reckless thing I could say is, well, you just need to go out and read the pesticide labels. Yeah, that's correct and true, and you will find the appropriate pesticide. But there are 15,000 pesticide labels. No one can do that. So just hunting and searching is not the way to get it done. Maybe you hear from someone else and they give you some leads on some things, and that would simplify it. But there's a better way to get this done. And the way to really get this done is to get on the Kentucky Department of Agriculture website. And there is a fact sheet that they update as needed. And it's called Kentucky Hemp and Pesticides. And it talks about what type of products can be labeled for hemp, what the requirements are for those pesticides to be approved for use on hemp. And then it gives a list of those pesticides that they have approved. And so basically, what they're looking at in terms of labeling pesticides for hemp is that to date, the pesticides that are available are a special group of pesticides called the minimum risk pesticides. Some people call these the 25B pesticides. These are a pesticide active ingredients that the EPA has determined that they're not of any risk to humans or the environment. So they're zero risk. And for that reason, they don't have food tolerances associated with them. A lot of these occur naturally in our foods already. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And so there are reasons why they determine that they don't need a tolerance like, synthetic pesticides and things like that. Not all of these can be used on hemp. Some can be used on hemp and some cannot. It all depends upon their labels. Now, with these minimum use pesticides, they don't require the EPA to approve their labels. They can generate their own labels. There's no EPA registration number associated with these because they're not approved. However, according to state and federal laws, people using these pesticides still have to use them according to their label. You just can't use them willy-nilly on anything and at any rate or any way you want. No, you have to follow the label. So some of these have written their labels in such a way that we can use them on hemp. And a lot of times they write their labels very broadly that these can be used on these recommended crops, but are not limited to these crops. Well, that means you can pretty much, in that situation, you could use it on anything. So they may say just recommended crops or crops such as, or crops including but not limited to. Those are the products that open their door for use on hemp. The other thing is some have restrictions for use in the greenhouse, others have restrictions on use in the field. And so, depending upon where you want to use it, they need to be labeled for those uses, or at least there should not be any restrictions or prohibitions on those uses. So, sometimes they say they can be used on hemp. They don't say anything about the greenhouse. And what we say is that they are silent on greenhouse uses. And in such a situation where they're silent on greenhouse uses, they do not prohibit use in the greenhouse. We allow those uses in the greenhouse in Kentucky. That's not true in every state, but in Kentucky we do. And the same goes for field use. The other thing that we need to look for on the label very carefully is to make sure that they don't prohibit use on crops or plants for human consumption. So, and that can be on the label as well. So, labeled for unspecified crops or labeled for hemp. So, some of these are labeled specifically for hemp. The label allows use on the sites you're going to try and use it on, and it doesn't prohibit use on crops or plants for human consumption. And when you think about what we're talking about with human consumption, would be CBD production, fiber, not fiber, seed production that could be feed meal or uses as seed as a food. So those would be some of those. Now, the other requirement that the KDA is specifying is that if people are using any pesticide on hemp, that they have a pesticide applicator's license. So usually this is for people using restricted use pesticides, but for hemp, they are also telling people they need to have this. And so what a hemp grower would need to do is get a private applicator's license. This is done at your local county extension office. It basically involves 3 hours of training, and it doesn't cost anything other than your 3 hours. And then you get a license that's good for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, you do it again. You go back to your county extension office, you get an updated 3 hour training, and you get a new license. And you can do this as many times as you need, as you want. If you lose your license, go back to your county extension office. You don't need to be retrained. They can just print you off a new license. And so it's part of your taxes already. So it's a free service for you. It's also a great time to ask your county agent if you have any questions about pesticides or other extension related issues that may be going on. Another question that comes up is industrial hemp. What is industrial? Some labels say it's labeled for hemp, which that means everything. Others say they're labeled for industrial hemp. And how I interpret industrial hemp is where the THC concentration is less than 0.3%. And so that's what I've been using for that for industrial hemp. Um, that's another issue that comes up quite a bit. So Kim, I did a roundabout way of answering your very concise and direct question with a very long answer.
No, I think that's great. I think that's a really nice overview of a lot of information. This is obviously a tricky topic. And especially I think in the hemp world, there are a lot of questions here. So I appreciate that answer because it just gives us a really good basis to build on. So one of the things that you talked about was the Kentucky Department of Agriculture and that great document that they have, which we'll link to in the resources for the video below. Um, but we do have viewers that are from other states. And while your expertise is obviously here in Kentucky, do you have a feel for kind of how it might work or what resources other state growers might want to look for?
It's all over the board with other states. There are some states that have great resources. You know, they really specify what's approved for their state. So, you know, what do you need to have lined up to use these things in your state? One is, you know, that they need to be a pesticide with a label. You know, again, if it's a 25B, it doesn't have to be registered, but it has to be a labeled pesticide. Uh, we're hoping in the next year or two, we're going to get some new pesticides that become registered, and they're through the minor crop uh, program. And there's some things that are getting close now to being submitted to the EPA for approval. Some fungicides and hopefully insecticides and herbicides later. So those are coming through the pipeline. So you have to have a labeled pesticide. The other thing is you need to make sure that pesticide is registered in your state. And I know in Kentucky, I can't speak to other state laws, but in Kentucky, every product has to be registered annually, and that includes, you know, the company making an application. There's paying a service fee for that, and then it becomes available for purchase and use in the state of Kentucky. Different states can have different products available within their state. So you should check with your Department of Agriculture in your states that they are what we call the state lead agency or the SLA that handles registration of pesticides within your state. My advice to people, hemp growers in other states, is to check to see if your state has lists of approved pesticides. If not, if you see some on lists for other states, you may want to send an email to your Department of Agriculture just asking if that's approved within your state. Um, I am not making recommendations for other states. That's outside my area of expertise.
Sure.
But you have entomologists and plant pathologists and weed scientists in each of your states, and hemp has been on the radar across the country for the last few years.
Okay. Um, yeah, great to know for other growers as well, just so that they kind of have an idea of maybe where to get started. Um, because obviously the label is the law. We want to make sure everybody's following the rules. So if they know where to go, I think that's a great place that they at least have a starting point there. Um, you talked a little bit about silent labels, which I thought was really interesting. And one of the questions I guess that I have is kind of a follow-up to that is you talked about the difference between, you know, greenhouse and field use and how if it's not specified, you can kind of apply in those situations. How does that work when we start talking about things like moving from a more industrial space to more of like a medicinal space when we're talking about hemp? Is that fall within the silent label or is that specified?
Okay, and let me be be clear on what I was talking about. Particularly when you talk about medicinal hemp, I do not include medicinal cannabis. That's a different animal altogether. And so we're not talking about cannabis but just medicinal hemp, and we're looking at the CBD aspect. I think is what you're addressing. CBD versus fiber production.
Mhm.
Fiber, clearly that's an industrial hemp product. CBD is sort of in that gray area. And one reason why it's in that gray area is how it's awaiting classification by the FDA. And that could change a lot of things depending upon, if the FDA rules fall certain ways, that's going to definitely affect the pesticides that can be used on it. But right now, being the FDA has been somewhat silent on their ruling with hemp, or they haven't released it yet. If things say industrial hemp or just hemp on the label, they can be used both for fiber, seed, CBD production, so that they don't have to say for CBD production. And I think that's addressing your question on the silent nature of the uses of the hemp.
Yes,
But,
yes, that nails it right there. No, that's great. Because that was one of the things, like, does it have to basically kind of specify is the use for what you're going to do with that hemp product, does that need to be specified on the label or not? So yeah, that was perfect.
but one thing I want to say, hemp is not cannabis, and
Mhm.
so that's different. That different entirely, and yeah.
Right. And here in Kentucky, we're not there yet. So that's maybe a direction in the future. But for right now, we'll keep our conversation to hemp. But obviously, for those that are growing cannabis, there's probably a whole different level, whether that be for recreational or medicinal, that would be a different conversation. So just kind of specifying that for our viewers as well. Kind of changing topics a little bit, or kind of directions a little bit here. Um, we talk about organic products or some of these biologicals that are labeled for pest management. Are those automatically approved for cannabis, or do those kind of fall in their own category? How do those work? If you wouldn't mind to kind of explain that a little bit.
So are they approved for, did you say cannabis or
Well,
or
cannabis
hemp?
sativa meaning hemp.
Okay, let's just say hemp.
Yep, that's fine.
So
Yep, sorry.
I'm more comfortable with it
Yeah,
with that.
sure.
And so the organic products, and what does organic mean? It's just how that active ingredient is produced. It's through organic means. It's not through test tubes and all those things that go through making synthetic products. However, and this is where some organic people that they get uncomfortable when I say this, but all the other restrictions on the label, well, not all the restrictions on the label still apply to organic products. And so, if it's organic and it tells you that you have to use a respirator, I've had pushback from some growers saying, well, no, I don't. It's organic, it's safe. And it's like, no, that's on the label, and that is the law. You know, why is it on the label? Well, there can be all sorts of reasons. They don't tell us why things are on the label, but could because of toxicity, could be because of allergenicity or other things like that. And so, if a pesticide is organic, can you use it for hemp? That was your question.
Mhm.
Um, it all depends on what the label says. The same things I said about, does it allow use on unspecified food and feed crops? Uh, does it allow use on the site that you're going to be applying it on, in the greenhouse or in the field, or are there prohibitions against any of those? And so it really doesn't matter if it's a synthetic product or an organic product. You still have to read the label. You have to see if you can use it on hemp, if it allows, use on unspecified crops. And then it doesn't have prohibitions against the site you're going to use it on. So all that still comes into play, irregardless if it's organic or not. Now, I have to say, most of or nearly all the products that we have available are organic, but we still have to check the labels.
Right. Reading that label is so important. That's I think step number one. Always make sure you read the label. Um, awesome. All right. So I think that's all the questions that I have, but is there any other information that you think folks should know,
Yeah,
or any future directions you want to share as far as moving in this space? I know you kind of referenced that there was maybe some things in the pipeline, but obviously, if you want to kind of conclude us here with just any final thoughts that you might have.
yeah, and that was exactly just what I wanted to say a few words on is what's in the pipeline. This is a relatively new crop. Uh, Getting products registered for a new crop is a slow process. It takes some time. And that's what we're in right now. Generally, to get a new product, available for, field corn or, cabbage or hemp, someone has to identify a potential product. They have to figure out what the use pattern is, that it's going to be effective and safe, and then they have to go through the process of getting it registered, and approved. And really, where we are in the pipeline is we've had 50 different products that have been proposed for hemp with the minor use program, and they've prioritized those. And every year, two or three of those get into the research pipeline in terms of coming up with the data necessary to get approval from the EPA to use those products. And some of those products are probably 3 to 4 years in the pipeline. It takes about 5 or 6 years to get approval on some of those. Assuming that they do get approved by the EPA, it generally takes 5 or 6 years, go through the process. It's a very slow and deliberate process. But we actually have a number of really good products, really effective. They look quite safe. They evaluate them not only on human safety, but environmental safety, as well as how effective they are and their safety to the plant. I mean, we don't want a new miticide that's going to burn up the leaves on your hemp plant. And so they all go through crop safety and efficacy trials as well. And so I would say in the next year to 2 years, you're going to start to see these products that do get approved from the EPA. We're on the cusp of finally seeing those come out now. So I think the first one's going to be a fungicide, followed by some herbicides and insecticides that are labeled for hemp. So this is going to be more of a mainstream crop in the future. That at least that's my expectation.
Excellent. No, that's really exciting news. It'll be a nice day when we don't have to say, well, there's nothing labeled anymore. That'll be great. So, thank you so much, Rick, for taking the time to chat with me today and to share all of this information. Like I said, this is a really big topic, but it's an important one that we wanted to make sure that we shared with our growers. So, thank you again for just sharing your wealth of knowledge. We couldn't have covered this topic without you.
And if you can link that KDA fact sheet in there, I think that would be very helpful for everyone.
Just a reminder that all resources will be linked in the video description below. Thank you again for joining us for this edition of Budding Solutions.